All right, good evening. Hi, everyone. I'm Wes Rades, the Executive Director of Bay Nature. Welcome to today's Bay Nature Talk with Jeremy Miller about urban astronomy and the world above us in the night sky. Bay Nature is a nonprofit independent media organization devoted to environmental journalism covering the San Francisco Bay Area. We publish the quarterly Bay Nature magazine, plus a weekly email newsletter, social media channels, and a website at baynature.org. Bay Nature Talks brings our stories to life and connects you more deeply with experts in the field. I join all of you in my eagerness to learn from our speaker tonight, Jeremy Miller, author of Bay Nature's Winter 2024 cover story, Astronomy in the City. Whether viewed through the lens of traditional telescopes or more modern methods of astrophotography, Jeremy writes, the night sky promises plenty to discover. Tonight, we'll discuss amateur astronomy in the San Francisco Bay Area, viewing techniques and gear, and the basics of astrophotography. Thank you for making this event a virtual sellout. We've intentionally capped attendance to make this experience more interactive and conversational. Feel free to keep your camera on while we talk, and when something piques your interest, participate and ask questions at any time by using the raise hand or chat functions on your Zoom screen. If you have any technical difficulties, please know that this webinar is being recorded and a link will be sent to you after the event. We also want to thank all of our Bay Nature members who are in attendance tonight. Free access to Bay Nature Talks and Hikes, along with 4 quarterly issues of Bay Nature magazine, are all benefits of Bay Nature membership. If you're not already a Bay Nature member, you can apply the $5 you've paid for tonight's event to join at a discount. We'll follow up with that information after the talk. Tonight, we're in for a real treat, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Jeremy Miller. Jeremy lives in Richmond, California. His writing has appeared in Bay Nature several times, along with many other notable publications, including Harper's, The New Yorker, and Sierra Magazine. When he's not gazing at the stars, Jeremy enjoys backpacking and fly fishing in the Sierra Nevada and the Rocky Mountains. Jeremy joins us tonight as if he were preparing to lead us outdoors on an evening viewing. So welcome, Jeremy, and thank you for being here with us tonight. As I bring you up on screen, please tell us where you are and how you're doing this evening.
Hi, everybody. Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So I'm sitting here in my living room, and as I'm guessing most of you guys are in the Bay Area, if you've noticed the cloud cover outside. So after the talk, I won't be taking my telescope out actually to look at the stars, but I wanted to kind of give everyone an overview of the gear, of sort of the techniques that I used to take pictures that appeared in the magazine, and yeah, and talk a little bit more about how I got pulled into this hobby, and I would love to answer questions for any of you who are interested in making the same sort of plunge. So yeah, where should we begin, Wes?
Well, I'll start with the opening line of your Bay Nature story. It reads, it's 7 p.m. on a crisp October evening. My telescope is set up in the backyard, aimed at an object more than 6,000 light years from Earth called WR134. It's a wonderful invitation into your world, and I'd love for you just to take us through a series of images, let people know exactly what they might be able to expect to see up in the night sky. So let me bring those images up on screen, and you take us through what we're seeing.
Sounds good. Before you do that, though, Wes, one thing, just to let you know that the pictures that you're going to see, several of them were taken with the telescope that I have right back here, which I'll talk a little bit more about after we go through the pictures.
Terrific.
All right. So this first image is, I'm guessing some of you who are familiar with space, who may have astronomy guides in your house, you may be familiar with this image. This is the Horsehead Nebula, one of the most famous deep space objects. It's located in, how many of you guys, maybe, I don't know if we can do a show of hands or anything. I'm guessing most of you know where Orion is. This is one of the most prominent constellations in the sky. If you can find Orion and you can find its belt, right, the Hunter's belt, this is in in the star that's sort of the leftmost star of the belt. And the bright star that you can see there in the frame, the blue star, is called Alnitak. And yeah, this is a fantastic and fairly easy object to photograph for astrophotographers. So we'll go in a little bit more into the techniques, but this is a good image, a good object to start with. I guess we can go to the next. This object is called the Tulip Nebula. Now, this is not an easy object to photograph, especially from a light polluted place like San Francisco. This is located. The Tulip is located in. I believe this one is in Cygnus. I can't totally remember where this one is located. And the interesting thing is about this telescope is that I don't actually have to know where a lot of these things are located precisely in the sky, because my telescope will find it for me. The other interesting thing you may notice is that this image has a different sort of color palette to it. It's you see blues and oranges and yellows in there. And what I've done here is used a false color palette, which is the same color palette that the Hubble Space Telescope uses. It's called the Hubble palette, where you map the various colors. Well, and we'll talk a little bit more about how my camera works, but where you map various information you get from each of the filters on my camera to different colors. So what you're seeing there is, if you could see this very faint thing with your naked eye, which you can't, but if you could, it wouldn't look like this. It would look very pink. So we'll get a little bit more into how filters work and what the Hubble palette is. So yeah, the Tulip Nebula. All right, next one. And this is WR134. This is in the constellation of Cygnus. This is, as I described in the story, one of the most difficult objects I've ever photographed. Very dim, very faint emission nebula. So for those of you who don't know, emission nebulas are these massive accumulations of ionized gas and dust out there in the cosmos. I believe this is on the order of 1,000 to 2,000 light years away. And so this picture took me close to 20 hours of exposure time over several nights to put together. And another thing we'll talk about is that these are composite images, right? These don't just come out of my camera looking like this. They're created by the stacking of individual frames, and each one of the frames in this image, I believe, was, I think, 8 minutes. So this is this was a very painstaking process, but I was very excited to see the final result of this one. It was hard to believe that I was able to kind of get this much detail. So this marks a sort of an evolution in my craft. So yeah, and so you can go to the next one, Wes. So this is another photograph of W134, but this is how it looks, how a single image looks through my camera. The interesting thing is my camera is a monochrome camera. It doesn't take color images. It takes black and white images. And what happens is I use different filters that pick up different wavelengths of light. This is nebulas tend to emit gas or light in 3 different spectra. One is in hydrogen alpha, one is in oxygen, and one is in sulfur. And this is the hydrogen alpha spectra. And basically this is the sort of the detail. And then what I do is I take those 3 different images, hydrogen, oxygen, and sulfur, and then I stack them together to produce a color image, an RGB image. And like I said, we'll get a little bit more into that. I'll show you the actual camera that I use in just a second. But just keep in mind that when I see these things on my computer screen, this is the way they look. So we can go on to the next one. This is another beautiful nebula in Cygnus called the Crescent Nebula. You can see it kind of, to me, it looks like a deep space brain or a bagel or something, right? There's that beautiful pink gas in the middle with the blue shell. The pink is the hydrogen alpha that I talked about, and the blue is that oxygen. And so this is a true color image. If you could pick this up with your naked eye, this is actually how it would look to us, this very pink and blue sort of image. Um, and this is another one that's fairly easy for new astrophotographers to see. Okay, and we can go on to the next. Um, this is another image in the Hubble palette. You notice the oranges and the purples and the blues. This is of two objects, one called the Flaming Star Nebula, the one that kind of looks like a dragon off to the left side, and then the Tadpoles Nebula, which if you could zoom into it, you'll see two little wriggling looking objects swimming toward the middle of it that are, you know, these super hot ionized balls of gas. And this, incredibly, is a very wide frame image. So the other pictures that I just showed you were taken with this telescope back here, this very sort of long focal length telescope that gives a lot of magnification. This, in fact, was taken with a camera lens, a cheap camera lens. So one of the things I want to talk with you about tonight is that if you're interested in this, you don't have to buy a big telescope like this. Some of the best pictures and some of the most fun astrophotography can be done with a DSLR camera. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And I think we might have one more image in here. Yeah, and so this is a different sort of object. This is a galaxy. It's a spiral galaxy in the constellation of Triangulum, called the Triangulum Galaxy. This is like our Milky Way. This is a galaxy that's part of what's called the local group, a cluster of galaxies that includes you know, this galaxy, the Andromeda Galaxy, and 5 or 6 others that are very close to us. The one thing that I learned, you know, that when I came into this hobby, I wasn't you know, I'm not a trained astrophotographer. I'm a nature writer. I thought that I was going to be able to see these things sort of easily, but it turns out that the nebulas are much easier to see and photograph than galaxies, and that's because of the great distance between us and these galaxies. The Triangulum galaxy is you know, the nebulas that I just showed you were like 1,000 to 5,000 light years away. These things are on the orders of millions of light years away, and these are entire other, you know, star systems, you know, like our own Milky Way. So this is a fairly easy galaxy to photograph, but in the city, they're not very easy to photograph in general because they're very dim and very distant. And we can talk a little bit more about that. Oh, and the other thing is that the filters that I talked about don't work when you're photographing galaxies.
It's really wonderful. And you know, you mentioned in your comments that capturing these images, making these explorations is something of a culmination of a journey for you. You couldn't have imagined that 10 years ago you would have been at this place. I wonder if you can share with the group just a little bit of your own personal journey, how you've gotten to today, and maybe how your own journey has been unique coming at it as an amateur, rather than someone with the trained background in this field.
Yeah, yeah. You know, as I mentioned in the story, I'm not a professional astronomer. I was a hobbyist as a kid. I had telescopes, you know, kind of the cheap Sears type telescopes that you could use to look at the moon and the planets and that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm not a trained astronomer, and in fact, you know, 10 years ago, I didn't even have a telescope and wouldn't have imagined. Even jumping into this, you know, and then the eclipse of 2017 happened. My son and I, you know, we spent a lot of time outdoors, hiking, backpacking, and we went to Oregon to see the total eclipse, and it was a sort of a mind-blowing sort of epiphany that, I mean, you know, it just was one of those events. If you've experienced a total eclipse, you'll know it sort of reorients, recalibrates your sense of where you are on the planet. So right when we got back, my son said, he was 9 years old at the time, said, "Dad, we need to get a telescope." And so we went out and we bought a pretty good sized telescope and started looking at the planets. And one thing I'll never forget about that is that my son, you know, I put the moon in there and he was blown away with that. And then we started trying to look at some of these nebulas that I'm photographing. And he said, let's look at the, you know, the Andromeda Galaxy or the Orion Nebula. And if any of you have ever done that, you'll know that they don't look anything through the lens of a telescope, even a very good one, the way that they look in the pictures in his, so he had these space books, and he's like, how come that doesn't look like the picture in my space book? And I said, well, those pictures are photographs, but I had no idea how to take them. So then he pushed me in the direction of, okay, well, let's learn how to take those pictures. So we bought a little refractor telescope that was made for astrophotography, and I connected my DSLR camera to it, and we were able to take some fairly good, albeit for sort of rudimentary pictures of some of these objects, the Andromeda Galaxy. We started to be able to tease out the spiral arms. We pointed at the Orion Nebula, and we could see the beautiful wisps of gas. We pointed at the Horsehead Nebula, and that was one that really got me. I thought I've been looking at this and have loved this object since I was a kid, in my space books, and to see that pop up on the screen, that was the moment when I said, okay, I'm hooked. And so I started looking into bigger and better telescopes. And over the course of 7 years, it's a lot of trial and error, a lot of online sort of scouring of chat boards, of calling and annoying people at telescope shops. The thing that I've learned about the astronomy community is it's a very supportive, very sort of skilled DIY kind of community. It's a community, and people are very, so gracious with their time, and through all of that, and a lot of trial and error and perseverance and a lot of bad nights, I've gotten to the point where I can take pictures that I'm fairly proud of. And seeing my image on the cover of Bay Nature magazine was like, the next step. In fact, I think that's the first time I've ever seen one of my photographs printed. I've tried to print them on my printer at home, and they don't look anything like that. So that was, getting that magazine in my hands was a great sort of moment in my evolution as an amateur astronomer.
Outstanding. I'd like to give just a warm welcome to everyone who's joined over the last few minutes. Thank you for battling through the tech issues. As we're in conversation with Jeremy this evening, just a reminder that if you have questions, feel free to ask them at any point. You're welcome to keep your cameras on. Just use either the raise hand function or the chat function in Zoom, and we'll make sure that whatever is on your mind, we can address as a group together. That's the point of the smaller format tonight. Now, Jeremy, in a second, we're going to ask you to take us through your gear setup, so that if there are others in the group who are interested in joining this community, they'll have a head start. But before we get to that, I'm hoping that you can just orient us even a little bit more locally. You're right that the Bay Area is a somewhat notoriously difficult environment for astronomy. And I'm curious if you can elaborate a little bit. Let us know what factors make urban astronomy in this area particularly unique or challenging, and what you'd recommend as a result.
Yeah, it is. It may be one of the most difficult places in the country. Part of it has to do with the high humidity. So when I set this telescope up at night, if I were to put it out there on my deck, which I wouldn't do because there's too much vibration out there, but if I put it down in my yard, it would the lenses would cover in dew. The cold surfaces are a magnet for dew. So I have to use heaters to prevent the formation of dew, and that's just to do with the high humidity of our area. Another thing, the thing that plagues all cities is the light pollution. San Francisco isn't unique in that regard, but being in a dense, bright city poses a lot of challenges. The interesting thing that I learned is that a camera it's a light pollution. It's a way to cut through light pollution. And like I said, I'll talk a little bit more about those filters, but the camera is a tool to help you eliminate the light pollution. Another thing is the fog, right? We've got, this sort of just kind of ebb and flow of fog, and I'm in Richmond, and the fog just comes. We can watch it, come in and out, right? So I will look down there. I can see Angel Island from where I live, and if I see any trace of fog through the Golden Gate, I pack everything up because I know it's only a matter of time before it gets up here and wipes everything out, and I don't want to be out at 12 at night packing everything up if I haven't been able to get any images. So then there's the fog factor. And so, so there's fluctuations in sort of meteorological conditions. The one thing we do have going for us, though, and I don't totally understand the physics of this, but I've been told by a number of people, is that being on the ocean, right, close to the ocean creates what's called laminar flow. And when you get a good night here, it can be very good because we don't have the complex topography, of like where I grew up in Denver, where you've got air flowing over mountains, you've got a lot of turbulence. Here we get a nice laminar, linear flow of air that reduces turbulence. And turbulence is one thing that really plagues astronomers. I don't know if any of you have looked up, even with binoculars or, through a telescope on a very turbulent night, it almost looks like you're looking through water. Here, when you get good conditions, when everything lines up right, you don't we get rid of a lot of that turbulence. And that's actually why a lot of the big telescopes, observatory telescopes, are located on oceans, sort of in Mauna Kea in Hawaii, or the Lick Observatory, which was a very prominent research observatory until sort of the sprawl of San Francisco and in San Jose kind of surrounded it. So when things are good here, when things line up, it can be very good. It's just those nights tend to be few and far between.
Mm-hmm. So I think we all have been probably looking at that telescope piece of machinery there behind your shoulder. I wonder if you might take us through your typical gear setup and what you use to get outside.
Yeah. Well, so what we've got here, we'll start with what the telescope is sitting on before I talk about the telescope. What the scope is sitting on is what's called a German equatorial mount. This is the most important piece of equipment for astrophotography. And what this mount does basically is tracks the motion of the night sky. I'm sure everyone here knows that, about the North Star and the way that the everything sort of pivots around the North Star based on this rotation of the Earth on its axis. Well, this mount sort of counteracts that movement. It moves at sort of the same rate of the rotation of the Earth, right? And so the mount moves in two directions. One is this is called there's right ascension and there's declination, and I always forget the two. But one way it moves is like this, right? And then the other way that it moves, pivots, is like this. And so these two sort of types of movement, right, can mimic the movement of the night sky. And so it's got motors in it, and it tracks it. Now, the most important thing I've got to do, though, is orient this every night to the North Star. Because so this little lens out front is what I use to aim and orient and set up the telescope to sort of point at the North Star. The North Star actually moves. It's not a static point. It's not perfectly above the North Pole. So every night it's a little different. So I've got to go out and make fine adjustments using these knobs down here to get that just right. And that can be, for a beginning astronomer, the most frustrating piece. I mean, this when I first started would take me an hour to do what they call polar alignment, aligning it to the North Star. Now I've gotten some little tools that help me do it now, but that's critical. If you don't have a good polar alignment, this thing doesn't work. It's also very heavy. And I'm a tear down astronomer, so I have to pick it up and haul it in to my basement every night, which is kind of a pain. I've lost a lot of sleep over the years doing that, but it's worth it. And then so let's get to the telescope. This is a telescope. This is called an apochromatic refractor. It's a sort of a long focal length, very good for photographing smaller nebulas, planets, that sort of thing. And it's a refractor telescope, so it's got lenses in it that bend light. I've got another couple telescopes in here that I'll show you, one in a second, that has some mirrors in it, that works a little bit optically different. But these telescopes are very good for astrophotography. The lenses are very sort of machine, precision machined, and you get fantastic images. On here too, up top, this is another little telescope, but this is another, aside on top of the mount, this is another very important piece of gear, and this is called, you see this little red camera back here? This is what's called an autoguider. And so what happens is, because the magnification of this is so, there's such magnification in the atmosphere, there's turbulence up there, that you have to have something to make small corrections to where this is moving. And so this is where the autoguider comes in. The autoguider fixates on a single star, and it tells the mount to make these little micro corrections that compensate for sort of the movement of the atmosphere, or if the telescope gets jiggled by wind a little bit, or a cloud or something comes through. So this is basically like, if you think of the mount like the steering wheel of the telescope, the autoguider is like the little micro corrections that you make on the road to keep your car, right between the lines, So without that, this kind of long exposure astrophotography wouldn't be possible at this focal length. So you need that. And yeah, and then another thing you'd see here is very kind of clean tonight, but usually I have a ton of wires and things coming out of that telescope, which connect to my computer. And this is sort of the thing that I kind of wrestle with in the story, and that I've wrestled with for a long time, which is, as I've gotten good at this hobby, I find myself looking at the computer as opposed to the cosmos. I'm looking at what's my autoguider doing? Is my telescope tracking? How do these images look? And so part of this is that, you get these images, but at some level, it's all mediated through a computer screen. So it's, there's a little bit of a trade-off there. I find myself looking up less as I've gotten into this, because I've become so fixated on the small technical pieces. And so I'm trying to try to do visual astronomy. But again, it's hard. It's a trade-off, because visual astronomy is difficult in the Bay Area because of the light pollution and just the natural problems with that. So yeah, but this all connects up to my computer, and then the nice thing is that I have set it up to where I don't have to be outside in the backyard all night. When I first started, I was out there babysitting this all night. And I figured out now, through the miracle of networking and remote desktop, I can be inside. Because my wife is about ready to divorce me. She's like, if you're gonna, you're like married to your telescope. If you're gonna be out there all night, I might have to. So I had to figure out a way to be inside with the family, so I can remotely control this from right in my kitchen, and cook and be with the family and see what's going on. So that was a very sort of important breakthrough. Another one of these little epiphanies that have come along the way. Yeah. And so, it looks like a lot of gear, but it's a fairly, once you've gotten into it, the pieces sort of make sense, and it's sort of an elegant sort of dance of all these parts. And let me show you one last piece of gear. I don't have my camera attached to the telescope, but this is my camera. And it doesn't look like a regular DSLR camera. This is a purpose-built astrophotography camera. And basically what it's got in it that makes it different, it's got the same sort of sensor as a Canon or Fuji camera. In fact, it's got a Panasonic sensor in it. But what makes it unique is that it's got a cooler in it that drops the temperature down to, I think I usually have it set at -20 degrees Celsius. And what that does is reduces the noise in the image. The colder the sensor, the less read noise and the more detail you get out of the images. Another thing that it's got, the most important thing, is this filter wheel. And this is what I was talking about with those filters. The nebulas that I was taking pictures of emit light in different wavelengths. And each one of these filters isolates a certain wavelength of light and enhances it on the sensor. And so that does one of two things. It picks up that little bit of light and filters out the rest, but it also cuts the light pollution. So those filters are sort of vital for urban astrophotography. You've got to have some way of coping with the light pollution. So those filters do that. And that's sort of the miracle. The digital sensor along with those narrowband filters are what I see as sort of a revolution in amateur astrophotography. I mean, my images, I'm pretty proud of them, but I'm not very, there are people out there that are taking images that look like they come from the Hubble Space Telescope or James Webb with this stuff, which is incredible. And it's all through the miracle of these narrowband filters. The other thing you might have noticed is this is actually my favorite telescope right now. And it's not a telescope, it's a camera lens. And it's a very cheap camera lens. It's an off-brand 135 millimeter lens by a company called Rokinon. It's become like a cult favorite among astrophotographers. This is if anyone were to ask me what telescope to buy to start out with, I would say don't buy a telescope, buy this lens. For one, it's much more forgiving. It gives you a wider angle, which means there's less. The images are less subject to the sort of vagaries of the atmosphere and movements of the mount. Another reason is, it's very inexpensive and it's just so light. Like I can carry this thing out and I don't have to strain my arm. That thing, that's like 25 pounds that I'm lugging around. This I can throw in my backpack. So I see this as another sort of miracle and revolution of astrophotography is that you don't need an actual telescope. You don't even need this camera. You could use your DSLR camera that you have at home and do these images. Now, there's certain drawbacks. You can't cool the sensor like I just talked about. You'll get a color image, and there are pros and cons to that. But you have everyone. I'm guessing that most of you have all the rudimentary tools that you might need to start your own astrophotography kit. So,
Jeremy, I wonder if you might elaborate on this point just a little bit more, and then I want to turn it over to the audience to get some audience Q&A going. I wonder, you mentioned in the story that your own journey here began literally with a kit that you mailed away for when you were a child. And I wonder if you might, for other beginners in the audience, give us a sense of kind of good, better, best. If you were just getting started in this work today, what are the price points? What's the investment you'd have to make to get started, either in visual astronomy or in astrophotography?
yeah, it's it's a tough question to answer. You could, if I were telling someone who's jumping in just as a visual astronomer, I would tell them, you can get a nice setup for $100, it maybe even $75 at a garage sale, $50. Find a used refractor type telescope, one that you can point at the moon, look at the rings of Saturn, that sort of thing. If you want to go to the next level and start building I should stop and say when my son and I bought our first telescope, I'm just going to hop off screen here for a second, I'll show another telescope. We bought a telescope like this, which is, see, I've gone down the rabbit hole. I've spent every last penny, the extra money that I have on telescopes. This is called a Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope. If someone were willing, if you had $500 to spend, you could get something like this. Now, this telescope is great for planets and the moon. Surprisingly, if you compare the size of this to this, it looks very small. But in fact, this has a much more magnification than that telescope. This is what's called a cadiotropic telescope. So it's got mirrors and lenses in it that up the magnification. And if you're really wanting to do visual astronomy and be blown away by, Jupiter or Saturn, I would suggest finding a telescope like this. And you can find these used on, you know, astronomy sites, eBay. I hesitate to tell people to go to eBay because you don't know, quite what you're getting with. There's a site called Astromart where you can buy used gear, and it's a community. People trust each other and they aren't looking to send damaged equipment. And if they do, there's repercussions, right? Or there's recourse. So if you're looking to do visual, just looking at stuff, this is a great option. The price tag is a little bit more than the $75 to $150 refractors you can get, but the payoff is huge. The one drawback of these kind of telescopes is that they can fall out of alignment, so you have to learn how to adjust them, to collimate them, but that's something that everyone can learn how to do. And then, set this back down. If folks are looking to get into astrophotography, I would recommend this setup. That, like I said, the small lens, and you can learn all the rudiments of astrophotography with something like this. This will do this. The nice thing about this too is I'm kind of a camera geek, so stop me if I'm going, over folks' head here, but the focal ratio on this is f2. So this is a very fast lens, right? It gathers a lot of light in a very short amount of time. That is an f7, which basically for me means I can get as much light with this in an hour that it would take me 3 to 4 hours to get the light that I can get through this. So this is quicker, this is lighter. I'm not going to be, looking to, what's the word? If I dropped this and broke it, I wouldn't cry myself to sleep, right? If I drop that, I'm going to be very upset.
All right,
So,
Jeremy, I have to interject. I've got an audience question here. They would like as much detail. Can you give a specification of what you are currently holding so that it can be
yes,
found?
yeah. So it's called a Rokinon, Rokinon, 135 millimeter, f2 focal ratio, f2 lens. That's this part, the lens, if you can see it here. It's held in this is a mount. It's a purpose-built mount that holds it. On the top here, remember I talked about the guide scope on that telescope? This is a little tiny guide scope that's designed for lenses like this, wide angle lenses. So this is made by a company called William Optics, and it's a 120 millimeter guide scope. And then up here's a little, this camera is called a ZWO ASI 120 millimeter mini camera. So like that camera here, this has got the camera, this makes all the little micro adjustments. And then back here we have, this is called an ASI 1600 camera made by the company ZWO again. And this is sort of, people think this is like an outdated camera. It does plenty for me. I mean, it's I think 10 years old maybe, but it's still amazing. And you can find these used again on astronomy sites for a third to a fourth of what they were selling for 10 years ago when they were new. So I would recommend getting yourself a used astronomy camera, or just plugging your DSLR camera into it. And I'm happy to take questions after this too, and talk a little bit more to folks that are interested in building their own rig. I'm happy to, yeah.
So that's a great segue. We're going to turn it over to audience Q&A for our last 15 minutes together. I've got 2 questions in the hopper, and I'd invite anyone else with a question. You're welcome to either drop it in the chat or just use the raise hand function on your Zoom screen, and we'll bring you on screen so that you can talk to Jeremy directly. The first question comes from Francesco, who says, "Thanks for sharing your passion, Jeremy. I'm Francesco, and I'm also an astrophotographer based in the South Bay. When
Nice.
I'm lucky enough to have good weather during the new moon, I like to go to dark sky sites like the Pinnacles National Park or Henry Coe State Park. Do you often get to take your images from a dark site, and where do you recommend going?"
I That's a great comment and welcome and glad to hear we've got another astrophotography person in here. Yeah, I don't get out as much as I used to. I'm not able to. I've got kids in school, and I'm sort of on top of my writing. Have you know, my writing. I'm hunched in front of my computer a lot. But when I do go, I did have a chance a few years ago to get to Death Valley, and this was before I had a lot of this stuff, and it was phenomenal. But I've heard great things about Henry Coe. I think that's one of the great places in the Bay Area to go. Pinnacles has got to be phenomenal. I would love to go down there and check that out. Another place that's a little high risk, but I've heard good things about is Point Reyes. If you've got a forecast, for clear fog-free skies, that's one of the good spots to go. But yeah, I mean it's dark skies. There's no substitute for it. Not the gear will not, the narrowband filters. Nothing can replace a good dark sky. One thing about a dark sky I've learned though is it's hard to find what you're looking for because there's so much up there. Right here, you've got the bright stars. There, it's almost like it could be overwhelming when you're trying to orient yourself in the night sky. So, yeah, great question. Hopefully that was helpful.
Next question is aspirational. It comes from Jennifer, who wants to know what images are on your bucket list to capture.
Bucket list. I really want to get to the southern hemisphere. Um, I've I've photographed or have tried to photograph a lot of the sort of the major objects. There's a lot, there's stuff being discovered all the time, and stuff that's beyond sort of uh my skill set and beyond sort of the amount of time that I can invest in a single image. But I would love to go to the southern hemisphere and photograph the large Magellanic Cloud. And there are just so many crazy nebulas and things that you can see down south. So my bucket list would be to go to Chile, to the Atacama Desert, and take some pictures of the southern hemisphere, the exotic nebulas of the southern hemisphere.
Excellent.
Question, thank you.
Okay, well, I've got a technical question to challenge you with. When you composite the images, sorry, this comes from ZR. When you composite the images on top of one another, since they're images of gas and dust, do the images sometimes not perfectly align because those elements are moving around from shot to shot?
That's a great question. The short answer is it's the dust. These objects are so distant that the movement of the dust is imperceptible to us. So there's no perceptible change. So the Horsehead Nebula, is virtually the same. I mean, if we had a very precise telescope, we might be able to see small, very minute changes in those structures. But they're so far away and so big that it's not a matter of dust moving that causes them not to line up. What is a problem, though, is if some of these images are happening over multiple nights, if the frame or the camera alignment gets changed at all on the back of the telescope, then there's a problem that, one night your image might be square, and then the next night it might be cocked like this. And so again, software, computers, there are the program, it's a stacking program called AstroPixel Processor, where I put those images in, and it finds the star patterns, and it aligns them for me. So it's amazing. I mean, it's all of these tools that were available, that were the sort of province of astrophysicists and cosmologists. So now anyone can get it. You can download this stuff online. So yeah, I have a program that does all that hard work for me. It would be impossible without it.
Right on. A gear question for you. This one comes from Bennett. Interested to know, do you have any experience with smart scopes that are controlled by a phone? Observing that some of those are very inexpensive.
Yeah, I have never used one. I've heard good things about them. The trade-off is the convenience factor. You set them up, it goes through, from what I understand, a self-calibration where it finds the stuff in the sky, orients itself, and then you just go on your smartphone and say, oh, go to the Andromeda Galaxy, go to Horsehead, and it will slew to that target and photograph it. The drawback is that it takes processing. These images. The other thing I didn't talk about is taking the picture is just half the battle. A lot, just as much of my time is spent trying to tease out the detail in these images. So with these new robotic cameras, you're going to see the structure of the horse head, but you're not going to see it in the resolution or the detail. Um, so it's a trade-off, and I think the price is fairly good for them. So I guess it's just what your priority is. If you're looking to set up quick, have a glass of wine, go out, see this stuff. They could be well worth it. But I think if you really want to kind of go deep and see what you can see and bring out with your equipment, there's no substitute for a big aperture telescope and a purpose-built, cooled um, astronomy camera.
Excellent. So we've got time for one more question before we break up. I see the darkening skies behind you, which is a good reminder.
Yeah.
I'll reserve my own question for the last one. It's a two-part question. You mentioned that astronomy can be something of a monastic pursuit. You find a lot of time spent on your own. At the same token, it's a great community that surrounds this hobby, surrounds this work. I wonder if you can send us off by sharing some of the community aspects that you found. Are there any groups that you'd recommend people connect with or get involved with? And then leave us in closing with a story. One moment when you were out there all by yourself, when everything came together and you experienced that magic that got you into this.
Yeah. Um, So the first part of the question is, yeah, the community. It's a large but diffuse community, kind of like the Milky Way itself, right? There are a lot of us out there, but we tend to be um, fixated on our own stuff a lot of times. But there are groups. The Chabot Science Center in Oakland is a great place to start. There's East Bay Astronomers. There are groups and chat forums online that I would recommend. Um, because I have so many other things going on in my life, I've sort of been masochistic and kind of gone after this on my own with sort of little guides. I would recommend that if you are jumping into this, to try to team up with folks if you can, because I think this would have been much easier if I would have had. I did have a mentor in Utah named Mark Bailey, who I was there to meet on an unrelated story. I do a lot of nature and writing, and was on a story covering a story about uh, the Colorado Plateau in Utah, and he has his own observatory there in a dark sky town called Torrey, near Capitol Reef National Park, and he took me under his wing and showed me his telescope, and then invited me out a couple of times to give me the basics and got me running. And I learned more from Mark in 2 nights with him than I had learned in like 2 months up to that point. Yeah, so find a mentor, find a group, and I think I mentioned some of those in the story in the sidebar. Um, and then to the second part of your question about a point where everything came together, where everything, I have those moments a lot, and I think one moment that comes to mind is a moment. Every once in a while, I will load myself into my car, and I have a campsite that I go to up on the other side of Yosemite National Park over Tioga Pass, called Saddlebag Lake, and I poach a campsite there in the off season. It's closed technically, but I go and I set up, and what always strikes me is sort of as the lights going down, I see the Mount Dana, and I can see all these summits around me, and Mount Kenness, and these glaciers. And what it reminds me is, space is, when you really start digging into it, it's vast, and it's not, what I feel anyways, is it's not for us, right? So what space reminds me of, especially at Saddlebag Lake, is just how special our planet is. That space is a reminder that, we're the only planet in the cosmos that's capable, that we know of, that harbors life for sure, and that there's nothing out there for us, right? Even if we could suddenly, sort of get to the closest, if we had the technology to get to the closest star, we're not doing that anytime soon. So the epiphany, I think, is that, and the lesson that space teaches me again and again, is just how, how special this planet is, and how much we need to do to protect it. So yeah, I think that's sort of the recurring theme in all of this is, it brings me
Well,
back home. It grounds me.
Jeremy, on that terrific note, that's a wonderful note to conclude on this evening. I can't thank you enough for doing this. Really appreciate you sharing your expertise with the Bay Nature community, both in writing with your wonderful essay in the winter issue, and then tonight with the opportunity to go deeper. We really appreciate it and look forward to applying everything you've shared with us as we turn our eyes upward toward the night sky. So thank you for being here with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for listening to me ramble. If anyone has any questions, you can, feel free to share my email or whatever, and I'm happy to answer questions, that you might have. So thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. So everyone, that concludes our Bay Nature Talk for the evening. We want to thank you again for attending and joining us both to learn tonight, and also just to be in community together. In the coming days, you'll get an email from us with a link to the recording for you to share, or if you'd like to take a second look in case you feel like you missed anything. Thank you again for being here tonight, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great night.